In this lecture, we're going to discover domestication, and we're going to do that by looking at the Belayev foxes that I told you about in the last lecture were experimentally domesticated in Siberia. A brilliant experiment that helps us understand what domestication actually is, and also help me and my colleagues test the idea that the unusual abilities that dogs show in using human gestures may be a product of domestication. So for this lecture, chapter 4 in the genus of dogs is all about this project and about the research on the foxes that I did, and also, of course, that Dmitry Belayev, the scientist who actually did the experiment to domesticate the foxes. And I think it'll be really interesting because it tells you the story, because Dmitry Belayev was really an amazing man. So, and again, communication, because we're still talking about these remarkable communicative skills. If you haven't had a chance to play the communication games, you can go to Cognition.com/MOOC and you can play the communication games for free with your dog. Okay, so I told you Dmitry Belayev was an amazing man. I really think he was a hero, literally. He fought in World War II, and he, in a very difficult time for genetics and biology in Russia post-World War II, in Stalinist Russia, continued to study Darwinian evolution and genetics, even though it was extremely dangerous. His brother was actually a geneticist as well, but was killed because at the time in Russia, geneticists and biologists in general, and specifically people who were arguing for Darwinian evolution, were in great danger because this was something that politically was seen as not consistent with the dogma of the Russian government at the time. So Dmitry Belayev was fascinated by how animals became domesticated. He thought that he had an idea about what might cause domestication, but of course he believed in evolution, and he was ready to use modern genetics, or the genetic techniques that he had at the time, to study domestication. The challenge was, how could he do that and not get persecuted or even killed like his brother? And in the meantime, in figuring out the answer to that, he not only survived and had many great students, but he had incredible discoveries about what domestication is, and we all benefit. So really, people like Ray Coppinger have said that this is probably the most important behavioral genetics work of the previous century, and I agree. I think this has had huge impact on my own thinking, as you'll see in the future lectures, as it applies to human evolution. So the fox in the picture is actually one of the products of the experiment, which I'll tell you about next. But that is actually a fox that, if you ask me the species is, it's a red fox. But you can see it's not a very red fox, so something has happened to this fox. And this is one of the Belayev foxes. So having interest in testing the domestication hypothesis and knowing the story of the Belayev foxes, which I'm about to tell you, I traveled to Novosibirsk. It's a city in the middle of Siberia where Belayev moved his family and his research and founded the Institute for Cytology and Genetics, which is part of the the Russian Academy of Sciences. And he conducted 45 years by the time I arrived, but even today the experiment continues, and it's been 55 years. And the experiment was very, very simple. He had two populations of foxes. One population he bred randomly in terms of how they interact with people, but the other population, the experimental line, depicted here, they did a very simple test, which is at 7 months, when the fox kits were 7 months old, someone, as the person in this picture is doing, would try to go and approach and touch the fox in the foxes that were born in this experimental line. And if they had the reaction that you see in the fox in the picture at the bottom, then they did not breed that fox. But if they had the reaction of the fox in the picture at the top, which was they approached, they let someone touch them, then they would breed that fox with another fox that had that same friendly, interested response to people. And after 45 years, by the time I got there, and now 55 years, they had an incredible population of foxes and we learned exactly what it is that causes domestication. So my work that I did there was hosted by Irene Plias-Nina, and then I was helped by Natalie Ignacio, and Natalie's holding the fox, and Irene's standing next to her. And all the work I'm going to describe would not have been possible without their help, but of course I couldn't help but include a picture of these very cute fox kits. That's about a 3 to 4 month old fox kit that we were working with to see how they use gestures. Now, the reason that I went all the way to Siberia to work with Irene Plias-Nina and Ludmila Trut, who has continued Dmitry Belayev's work after he died, was because I told you the challenge of testing the domestication hypothesis was how in the world could we find out if dogs really have unusual communicative abilities if we can't domesticate a species and intentionally try to get a population to be better at reading gestures. I mean, there's really no way to test the hypothesis, so therefore it's not going to really be available to scientific study. And it's not a very good hypothesis then. But the beauty of the foxes is that we knew, as I've described to you, exactly how the foxes that Belayev bred, how they came to be, and the selection pressure that resulted in some major changes to the foxes. So let me tell you about the changes that resulted from simply selecting foxes to be friendly, interested in people, and not aggressive. And I think the main thing that is surprising is that even though they only selected on behavior, they ended up having changes in morphology, where the foxes that were in the experimental line, that were bred to be friendly and interested in people, they had a much higher level or frequency of floppy ears, of star mutation, that's the white spot that you often see on domesticated animals. They had a higher prevalence of curly tails. They had piebald coats, like the fox that I showed you that was white, where they're different colored coats, just like you see on lots of domesticated animals. They also showed a feminized cranium, where basically the shape of the skull actually became more feminized, or all males had more feminized cranium in particular, and they had skeletal gracilization. So basically the bones of their limbs became longer and thinner. And these are, again, things that have been observed in lots of other domesticated species that were not experimentally domesticated.